The time is here. Christmas is just days away, and our goal was to beat diabetes by Christmas. To have an A1C below 6.5 when we test our blood sugar during the week after Christmas or sometime before we enter 2024. For those who've participated in our Fall 2023 challenge, I want you to do the 5 glucose tests in one day on any day after Christmas and before January 1. You're going to average those 5 tests and then use the formula or simply plug your average glucose into an online A1C calculator. I'll put a link under the description for the online calculator, and I'll also put the formula down there if you want to do the math yourself. On today's video, I want to talk about transitioning from Phase 1 to Phase 2 of this challenge. So what is Phase 2? It is the lifestyle you will want to live with for the rest of your days. Before we get into some of the specifics, I want to answer the question, why a Phase 1 and a Phase 2? Why not just give the lifestyle and diet that people will need for their lifetime and forget about dividing the diet and the lifestyle into 2 parts? Well, my answer is that when you are first diagnosed as diabetic, you have a desperate need to discover a simple but powerful truth, which is that you have far more control over your blood sugar and your diabetic condition than you realize and have been led to believe. The Phase 1 diet and lifestyle is powerful proof of this. You have entered into a crash program to bring that glucose down, as well as your A1C, and down very, very fast, with lightning speed, actually. And if you followed the guidelines closely, chances are you've done just that. You might say a light bulb has appeared over your head, and you now know that you can beat diabetes. You can make choices that will knock diabetes on its, well, you know. You've seen your glucose levels in the 200s, 300s, and 400s, and now they have retreated sheepishly into the 100s, and some of you have seen that amazing miracle of a morning fasting glucose below 100 milligrams per deciliter, or 5.6 millimoles. Wow, wow, and double wow. But now, it's time to transition to a kinder, gentler lifestyle and diet. No, you cannot possibly go back to eating that high-carb, high-sugar, high-starch diet that got you into this mess in the first place. That's gone forever. But there are some changes that you may be able to make that will make your lifestyle something you can easily live with and enjoy the rest of your days. I do need to say that if you're not anywhere near your target goal for your A1C score, well, I would not advise you to try this transition just yet. Keep on doing what you've been doing until you break through to that goal. And in case you wondered, I'm not going to tell you your goal. That's between you and your doctor. And goals and targets can change. There was a time when I was happy to be in the 5s club, and even the upper 5s was okay. The pre-diabetic level. But the more I learned and the more testimonies from others that I heard, the more my goal worked its way downward. Today, my personal feeling is that for most diabetics, getting an A1C in the 5s is very attainable, and getting it below the pre-diabetic limit of 5.7 is reasonable, a reasonable goal for most of us. But to each his own. You're the one who has to live with the health decisions you make. It's not for me to make them for you. But let's talk about a couple of aspects of your diet and lifestyle that you may want to experiment with. First, you might want to adjust your time-restricted eating. I encourage our challenge participants to eat 2 meals per day, separated by 6 hours with no snacking in between. This is extremely powerful, especially when those 2 daily meals are low-carb meals. But many people find that they can do very well with an 8-hour window instead of a 6-hour window, and they end up eating 3 meals per day within those 8 hours. And if that's your plan, you could possibly eat breakfast at 9 a.m., lunch at 12:30 p.m., and dinner at 5 p.m. I'd still encourage you to eat a very low-carb to no-carb breakfast, maybe some eggs and bacon or some sausage and egg and a cheese biscuit on a chaffle. or simply a chaffle with cream cheese spread on it and perhaps a little everything bagel seasoning sprinkled over it. If you're doing well, you may want to try a few of the healthier carbs in small portions, such as a clementine, which is a tiny orange, or a small, not very sweet apple with your lunch meal, and see how that works for you. If you still have fatty liver, well, you probably would want to stay away from most fruit, but if the fatty liver is gone, you may be able to get by with smaller portions of fruits that are not especially sweet, and in portions that are not large. Keep in mind that you can never, ever go back to eating large amounts of high-carb fruits or starches or any other high-carb food. Those days are gone forever. But you may be able to tolerate a small orange or a small apple with your occasional meals. I used to do that, but I finally gave it up altogether. Another food that's sort of marginal for diabetics is beans. I find I can tolerate a bean soup as long as it's not pure beans and the soup itself is not a huge monster bowl of soup. If it has other vegetables in the soup and the beans make up just one of several ingredients, well, that can work for me. I believe beans can be healthy, and I've never subscribed to the idea that our pancreases are not meant to ever process any carbs at all. In fact, I actually think it's healthy to give our pancreas a little work to do occasionally, but not to abuse it with monstrous portions of carbs the way we once did. I eat salads frequently and other low-carb vegetables. The truth is, almost any relatively high-carb food could work for you if you keep the portion size small enough, but in some cases, maybe I should say many cases, the carbs are so high and the glycemic potential is so explosive, they're just not worth eating or fooling with. A small portion of brown rice on your plate, or quinoa, or a medium-sized corn on the cob could possibly be tolerated by you once your insulin resistance is conquered. But these should be the exception rather than the norm. Now, there are 3 natural foods, I guess you could even call them natural high-carb foods, considered by many to be superfoods that really you ought to never eat again the rest of your life. You ought to just say goodbye forever. And those 3 foods you ought to just never touch, as far as I'm concerned, are the banana, the potato, and fruit juice. These are glucose-spiking monsters, and they're just not worth experimenting with, even in small portions. Say goodbye to these sinister, malicious, deadly enemies of diabetics. Ordinary bread, well, I could have put that on that list as well, but there are some breads that have a lot of fiber and can have less than 10 grams of carbs per slice. And in such a case, you might be able to get by with eating 1 slice of bread in a meal without too much of a spike. But be careful. As you move into phase 2, keep your glucose monitor handy. You're going to need Mike, the glucose meter, at your side to be your umpire, your health coach, and to tell you what works for you and what does not work. And if Mike, the meter, says no, do not allow any doctor, nutritionist, researcher, health expert, or YouTube guru to tell you yes. If Mike says no, it's no. Any food or meal that spikes your glucose past 140 milligrams per deciliter, should be around 7.8 millimoles, has to be eliminated or modified. Of course, when your blood sugar is already at 200 milligrams per deciliter before you even eat, you can't use that standard, but make sure that wherever you are in your blood sugar, your meals are not giving you major post-meal spikes. You might want to experiment with keto products that you find in the stores, but be suspicious of them and always test your post-meal glucose to make sure they live up to their name. It has been my experience that the keto foods and meals you make yourself are much more trustworthy than the keto foods and snacks that you buy at the store. But they are plentiful and they're tempting and they're worth testing sometimes. I do eat keto bread sometimes, but I never eat more than 1 slice per meal. And I trust the keto tortillas that I make in the kitchen much more than the low-carb tortillas that you buy at the store. This challenge to beat diabetes has been like training wheels on a bike for you. I've given you what you need to drive your glucose levels and your insulin levels down significantly. And if you've been diligent in following the guidelines, it has probably worked very well for you. I want to hear from you. Leave comments about it. But it is time now to take those training wheels off the bike. Go on YouTube and find keto and low-carb recipes. Experiment with various foods and combinations of foods and see how your glucose meter reacts to them. Dennis Pollock is not going to be looking over your shoulder anymore, not that I ever did. So go and carve out a lifestyle that crushes diabetes permanently and sets you up for decades of health and strength. You can do it. You now know how. You know what to do. And if your fasting glucose starts rising or your A1C starts floating upwards, well, it's time to make some changes. Become stricter with your diet. Go back to eating more meats and low-carb vegetables. If your new 8-hour window of eating isn't working for you, well, go back to a 6-hour window. You know, when we drive a car down the highway, we don't think about it, but our hands are always moving, turning the steering wheel one way and then the other. No car has such perfect alignment that we can just take our hands off the steering wheel and assume it's going to always drive perfectly straight. We're constantly making adjustments, a little left, a little right, a little left, a little right. By doing this, we keep our car between the lane markers and we avoid accidents. And that's how you beat diabetes. By keeping a close eye on our blood glucose, our fasting glucose, and our A1C scores, we learn how we're doing, and we make the necessary adjustments. We set a target, and then we make whatever adjustments necessary in order to keep within that target. And I find that as I age, I'm a little tougher with myself, a little stricter in my diet than I was when I was younger. I don't dabble with quinoa or rice, and I rarely eat any fruit other than berries, tomatoes, and avocados. I'm convinced that my number one health goal is to keep my glucose levels and my insulin levels on the low side. This goal overrides every other consideration. I'm not impressed with the so-called superfoods that contain all kinds of nutrition but spike my glucose like crazy. I would much rather have lesser vitamins and nutrients with low glucose than eat foods with lots of vitamins but spike my glucose into the 200s or even the 150s. Now, if you participated in this fall 2023 challenge, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment. Let me know how you did. And for many of you, it's time to take those training wheels off and start riding your metabolic bicycle like a champion. Enjoy your new life of health and strength and go out and serve God and be a blessing to others with your new health. If you've recently been diagnosed with diabetes and you've just discovered this channel, let me recommend that you go to our Uploads page, which will give you access to every diabetic video we've posted since we began. As you work your way through all our videos, I believe you'll find the help you need. A link to our Uploads page is in the description.